Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a presentation of our 2023 meetings and events forecast. Today we'll share the highlights of our American Express Global Business Travel meetings and events forecast that we have been releasing for the past 10 years and that showcases and highlights the most important and impactful trend in our meetings and events industry. My name is Eloisa Urrutia, and I'll be sharing the presentation with my colleague Encarna. You will probably see in the program that Sophia Eriksson was meant to be here. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it, so I'm substituting for her. So let's start. We'll start with the methodology. So the report has been built based on over 500 surveys across the globe from over 23, 24 countries, representing different stakeholders from our meeting and events industry, so corporates, suppliers, airlines. You can see here that a big majority were in North America and Europe, but we have also a lot from Asia Pacific and Central and South America. So it will give us a pretty representative picture of the meetings and events mood and impressions and trends for the next year. So let's start. These are the 5 key highlights from the meetings and events report. I would say the most impactful or important highlight is the optimistic mood among all meetings and events professionals. So meetings are roaring back. Meetings in person are coming back. Actually, they're coming back a little bit too fast for all of us. We've been overwhelmed in the meetings and events industry by how fast everything has come back. But it's definitely a good news. We're positive, and the next couple of years seems to be also very positive in terms of the amount of meetings growing. We've seen also an important shift in which meetings drive face-to-face meetings. So we've seen how companies are working, so employees are now working remote or in a hybrid version. And this drives how companies are now promoting and facing the company culture, which needs to happen through in-person meetings. The industry is getting serious about sustainability and diversity, equity and inclusion, and we're starting to incorporate it in all our strategies and our policies and best practices. The 4th highlight is with high demand and the supply still in a limited mood, it's clearly a seller market. And we also see a high increase in meetings budget, but also in the costs associated to all the meeting supply.
So let's start. Let's start with some numbers about what's gonna happen. So almost 68% of the survey respondents are very positive that we are going to come back to, in 1 or 2 years, to the pre-pandemic meeting numbers. Actually, we are experiencing in some regions that this is already happening. And we could say that especially for internal and for simple meetings, we are already there and even growing like by 25% in some regions. There is another indication here is that 87% of the meetings for 2023 expects to have like a face-to-face component. So we experienced this last years, a lot of virtual meetings, but now, as we can see here, 50% it's like in person only, 38% hybrid, that with some components, and then there is like a 12% of only virtual remaining so far. So if we can see a little bit more, and I can ask you like an audience poll just by raising hands, because we are all working differently and living differently. So let me just ask you, which of the following best describes your office's current status? So are you fully open? Can you raise hands? Which ones are? Right, but partially open or hybrid mode? Still a good time. Yeah. And closed or fully remote? Good. Great, great. So that brings us to that this is quite
Quite
significant.
aligned.
It's
Quite
quite
aligned
aligned,
with
but
the
it's
survey
yeah,
respondent.
exactly. So almost half of the organizations today are adopting hybrid or remote working, meaning that still numbers are 40% hybrid partially open, so it's quite similar to the numbers we see here, and still an 8% in fully remote. What happens here is that each company has different objectives, different goals. There is, like, let's say, like a common goal that is sustainability. We've seen that. But some companies and some organizations are under the talent retention goals. Others are on the new hiring programs. But something that everybody and all leaders agreed is that as all the workforce is dispersed, we really need to do something to meet them and, to bring people together. And that's why, internal meetings are really, really growing. And this is the first, what that we expect that face-to-face meetings for internal, it's as you can see here, growing across all the regions. So North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. So everybody's investing. Now, bringing people together is not anymore like optional to do internal meetings. So everybody needs to connect. People has been isolated during the pandemic, working at home, probably not engaged enough with the culture and the goals of each of the corporations. So something that we can say is that, meeting in person, now it's having and adding that value that we all really need. And with that, this is a new question in the forecast as is, okay, how these internal meetings are, these internal meetings are, which components, what's the key elements? And according to the forecast and to this question, so 40% are held in a different city where the HQ is located, meaning that there is a travel component and accommodation component. So people is traveling. It's not like before doing internal meetings in your city. So we see here that 45% includes accommodation, and 40% included social activities and networking, because as we said before, this is really something that it's not an option anymore. Despite all this optimistic, we cannot forget that the environment is quite uncertain. A lot of disruption across all the environment. You can see here a few that sounds in our head. So like COVID, cancellations, labor shortage. So, but still with all this disruptive environment, there is still optimistic, and corporations really want to do the
Sorry.
yeah, it's okay now, but corporations really still want to do big meetings, internal meetings, but now the expectations has changed as well. Everybody wants to do the perfect meeting, because after pandemic, okay, let's do it. Let's do the best meeting ever. But for that and to be successful, the antidote that we can see here, it's having much more planification. There is a factor that there's we need to be realistic and with how the lead times will affect the budget. And, and yeah, it's as we say, there are a lot of things going on. So it's really key to be transparent on the conversations and put the right expectations in each of the planifications of these internal events. So that brings us to the next slide. Thank you, Lisa. We've seen and we've heard that due to this uncertainty, now more than ever, it's important to have a meetings program in place. There's different things that has been done on that topic, as for example, having some approval processes that were not maybe necessary before, but now we've seen a lot of virtual meetings and probably in each corporations that has not been tracked or registered, so anybody knows what was going on. So now we've seen that there is like 69%, for example, inclusion of small and simple meetings, people who were not used to do meetings because there was not part of their work. Now they are doing that, and companies need to train them and to bring them some new technologies. And as well, another factor is inclusion of these virtual and hybrid meetings. So yeah, it's much more complex. Now it's not only to having the logistics making great and everything it's like under control. Now we also need to engage the attendees and have everything much more in a structured way. So that would be, going to the second trend.
Yeah,
third
thank
trend.
you. Getting serious about sustainability. So indeed, we have seen how after COVID, sustainability has changed from being a nice to have to an imperative in our business. We're seeing how global corporations have set very ambitious sustainability goals in line with the Paris Agreement, and they now need to cascade these goals into their meetings and events program and their travel programs. We're seeing that over 80% of the organizations take sustainability into account when planning their meetings and events. So actually in the RFPs, we see sustainability requirements of different levels, and we also see how an important part, so 3/4 of the respondent, say they have a sustainability policy or a strategy in place. So which actually showcase how important this is to all our industry. But then this data kind of contradicts the fact that only an average of 23% of the respondents actually measure their sustainability emissions, their event emissions. So what we're seeing is actually a challenge to cascade and to apply sustainability elements. And what we're also seeing is that corporation and travel management companies rely on their supplier network to fulfill and implement all these initiatives. So suppliers will be challenged on emission reduction elements, on certification, on best practices, and also on providing the accurate data for measuring our event impacts that companies need to report to their ESG stakeholders. On another side, we've got, at the same level, diversity, equity, and inclusion that has also become a key component. As you can see here, for almost 90% of the respondents are incorporating DE&I elements into the meetings program. There's very diverse ways across the region on how we can incorporate those elements. And I wanted to highlight two. So North American corporations typically choose minority-owned and diverse suppliers as a key element of DE&I inclusion, while as in Latin America, the focus is on accessibility. So there is, if you download, at the end we'll show a QR code for you to download our full report, which is about 70-something pages, with all the details on this, on all these highlights we're talking about. And there's also a section on diversity and inclusion with case study that you can use for your own inclusion of diversity and inclusion in your policy. it's a seller's market. So we've talked earlier how the demand has exponentially grown, but the supply side is still challenged, with limited workforce and is not at full speed, hasn't fully recovered. So we've seen different challenges like labor shortage, obviously inflation, supply shortage. So the supply will still kind of lead the trend next year. And this is why we'll also see, as in the next slide, what the cost will be increasing due to the fact that it's a seller's market. But also we'll see an increase in spend. So as Encarna has said earlier, companies want to meet, they want to meet in person, not only for internal meetings, for client meetings, for product launches, which is actually the second category of meetings, which is very much growing after internal meetings. So companies haven't been able to showcase their product, to launch their solutions in the past 2 years, and they want to do it next week. So they also have budgets for that, and the budgets are increasing, so there's a lot of growth. Growth in budgets, growth in spend per attendee, growth in spend per meeting on average. And again, it's very interesting if you download the report and see the detail on the average spend per attendee the companies are forecasting for the next year. And, well, the summary, increase in costs and increase in rates and budgets.
All right, so now we're explain the trends. Let's have a look to the regional insights. As Luisa said, we have the full report by region, so you can find detailed information for each region. But for this session, we wanted to talk a bit about Europe and what are the key indicators. So it's a good sign that we're still, like a 66% of the respondents think that their spend in meetings will increase. So that's really, really good news. And again, meeting by format, we can get into these European key indicators that face-to-face are really coming back. This is really, really, really great news for us. Let me as well give you a little bit of what are the top 5 destinations according to our Meetings and Events Meeting Insight platform. There are still, as you can see, like a trend to urban cities. Two areas, Madrid, Barcelona, London, Paris, and Manchester. Good, it's good to know. It's still urban, though. All right, so that's not much to say. So before we close the session, we want you to share some recommended actions for the meetings experts, for the meeting planners. Increase the stakeholder adoption, educate them in policies, in programs of the corporations. Implement a simple meetings booking technology. And that's because there are a lot of repetitive tasks that can be supported by some good technology in the market for these small meetings. And it can be something that will really be appreciated by a lot of stakeholders. As Eloisa mentioned before, and before that session, it's very important to define sustainable meetings program. So sustainability is a key. I'm not going to repeat myself, but this is what we've heard all around. And then another factor as well, evaluate your meeting program together with the travel program, because there's a lot of synergies between one and the other. People who are attending to a meeting, but they are, but the travel is included in the travel program, so it's really, really good effort and a good exercise to evaluate together. And the last one would be, don't forget the attendee experience. And this is a very good way to anticipate and understand the attendee expectations. So we will recommend a pre-survey sometimes, then you know, and you can be much more sensitive on diversity. So you know your audience and you know your event is going to be successful. And that would be all from our, yeah.
So this is the QR code. We recommend you scan it and read the forecast, or at least go to the sections that are more relevant or interesting to you. It's full of data. And connect with us if we can support you in anything related to your meeting management or any information related to the report. But before we close, I would like to give you the opportunity to ask some questions or share some insights regarding our trends. Any question in the audience? Yeah, hi, Chase.
Thank you so much. Very interesting, result and insight. So I'm really interested in your feedback on the increase, 66% comparing to 62, if I'm correct with the numbers.
Increase in which
in
was
From versus
meeting
last
span.
year.
Exactly, meeting span. Is that related to the inflation and the cost increase that we see, or is it a need to engage more, the stakeholders?
I think it's really both. So clearly, there's it has been like an explosion in as you probably know in meetings in person, and probably companies have not spent the budgets in the past 2-3 years, and they have more budget now. So I'm sure there's different scenarios, but it's really coming from the corporations. They need to recover time. They need to invest in their employees. They need to invest in their clients, or whatever type of meetings they do. And of course, in parallel, we all know the inflational trends we're all suffering. So I assume they've taken it into account and incorporated it to their budgets as well.
Yeah, just to add that comes from the survey was on May, June that year. So that was not exactly on the peak of the inflation. So, yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the ranking of the favorite destinations, because funny enough, for me, none of these is one of my favorite destinations. I work for a software company. For instance, we have diversity and inclusion already in our objectives, and we also have a sustainability officer, which means I'm really forced to check the destinations beforehand. So for me, for instance, Copenhagen or Amsterdam or the Baltics, when it comes to sustainability and also Wi-Fi structure, it's also a big topic, would be for me more important. So,
more sustainable, yeah, of course, yeah.
So how did you come to these results?
So again,
The 5 cities, you mean?
the data comes from the survey respondents. So, but you're right. So we see an important trend with sustainability. But I think the gap is probably that, as I mentioned, companies are incorporating it into their strategies and into their RFPs. But we still see a gap into the actual tangible practices. So, for instance, selecting a sustainable destination where they will have more sustainably certified hotels or other sustainability elements, and on the other hand, the destination selected is, well, honestly, probably due to the number of events they hold in Madrid, Barcelona, etc., which are more international hubs with more direct flights, with more offer, so availability and so on. But I agree with you. We should also look at more sustainable destination. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, we'll see next year, right?
We'll see next year. Yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments?
All right then.
Yeah.
So
I think the gentleman. Oh, not yet. Almost. The gentleman has a question here.
When you talked about accessibility in Latin America, what do you talk about? Do you talk about technology where they can access?
Also. So I think physical accessibility and obviously promoting virtual attendance for.
Okay.
This is another element of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So proposing virtual attendant versus not proposing it if someone
Yeah.
can't or doesn't feel comfortable attending.
Right. Okay.
There
thank
is
you.
a lot of detail on the forecast, for Latin America, so you're gonna find really, really interesting
Amazing. Thank
insights.
you. Your website dropped, by the way.
All right. So now, yeah? No?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time.